أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله ورسوله ولا تولوا عنه وأنتم تسمعون. ولا تكونوا كالذين قالوا سمعنا وهم لا يسمعون. إن شر الدواب عند الله الصم البكم الذين لا يعقلون. ولو علم الله فيهم خيرا ولو أسمعهم لتولوا وهم معرضون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم. واعلموا أن الله يحول بين المرء وقلبه وأنه إليه تحشرون. واتقوا فتنة لا تصيبن الذين ظلموا منكم خاصة واعلموا أن الله شديد العقاب. واذكروا إذ أنتم قليل مستضعفون في الأرض تخافون أن يتخطفكم الناس فآواكم وأيدكم بنصره ورزقكم من الطيبات لعلكم تشكرون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تخونوا الله والرسول وتخونوا أماناتكم وأنتم تعلمون. واعلموا أنما أموالكم وأولادكم فتنة وأن الله عنده أجر عظيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن تتقوا الله يجعل لكم فرقانا ويكفر عنكم سيئاتكم ويغفر لكم والله ذو الفضل العظيم. وإذ يمكر بك الذين كفروا ليثبتوك أو يقتلوك أو يخرجوك ويمكرون ويمكر الله والله خير الماكرين. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهدي الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. First, I want to just begin by sharing a little bit about how this affects each and every one of us, just to acknowledge the overwhelming feelings, subhanAllah, that we all have. Some of you know this, some of you may not know this. My wife is half Palestinian. Her family is in Gaza. So we are constantly in a state of worry about what's happening. We're receiving updates before the total blackout, before the internet was cut out almost completely this morning. And subhanAllah, what's interesting is you have some family members that are actually flipping through TV, trying to see if they can recognize any of the bodies on TV as their family, because there's no direct connection immediately on the ground. I also work for a relief organization. The storage house that we have, medical supplies and food and things like that in Gaza was bombed. It was not used in any shape or form by anybody affiliated with Hamas. The two people that were working there, a father and his son, were martyred. They're no longer with us, and they have no history or affiliation with any other organization except, of course, relief organizations. And all of you have seen the feeds going up, I'm sure your TikToks, your Instagram, your Facebook, whatever other channel that you're using to look at what's going on the ground. It's been overwhelming, the amount of pain that we all have. I have my son and my daughter, Bayan and Bilal. Every time that I hug them or smile with them or see their giggle or their laughter, I can't help but think about, subhanAllah, the number of children in Gaza that don't have that luxury, that don't have that that opportunity, that don't even have a chance at life in that part of the world. And it's very overwhelming. It's very, very difficult to carry. And subhanAllah, you see things that really, really are hard to unsee. I don't want to get into the graphics, but I'm sure we've all seen things that are very difficult, subhanAllah. And then on the same side, or in the same token, you hear things that are really disappointing. You hear things like, the Palestinians have a history of, dramatizing things. We don't know exactly the number of deaths. We have to wait to verify, to confirm. And this is really atrocious to hear, because subhanAllah, you have children and parents that are writing, they're telling their children to write their names down on their hands and the IDs, and then whenever anything happens, to try to keep their hands close by so any injuries won't affect or wipe away that ID number, so they're able to keep track of the death toll. And the official death toll based on those IDs so far is counted and documented in a 204-page document. Imagine 204 pages, like an Excel sheet with number, ID number, name. Entire families were wiped out. Entire communities and neighborhoods were, wiped out. And the number of people that have come to us in the last couple of weeks, doctors that spoke out and lost their positions, research leads, research assistants, especially in certain departments, in certain hospitals, people that work in the public sector. You guys know Sister Sarah Jama. She was, bullied by the NDP into basically resignation twice, and it's a very complex story. And she's a local Hamiltonian because she spoke out and she called for, a ceasefire, and the language that she used was not good enough. It was not, deemed critical enough. SubhanAllah, to certain agendas. And it's very overwhelming when you see all of this happening. It almost feels like your voice is taken away from you. You're silenced. The amount of shadow banning that we've seen, people that have been bringing attention to the atrocities, that have lost the ability to basically communicate with their audience, ability to reach the audience. And it has given us a lot to reflect on. And subhanAllah, I don't blame any of you for having feelings of just being inhibited, being really stuck. People are not able to go to sleep. People are not able to disconnect from their phones. Especially the people that have family in Gaza. I see them on a day-to-day basis. And it's just very difficult to have a conversation because their mind is elsewhere. They're constantly worried, constantly in a state of confusion and worry and anxiety. And subhanAllah, it's understandable. Some of us here as Muslim brothers and sisters, we are also worried. We're also anxious. Some of you have not been able to go to classes. Some of you have not been able to go to tutorials. Some of you have not been able to finish assignments on time. And I just want to begin by acknowledging that it's okay. It's okay for you to take some time to yourself, to make sense of this, to process. It's okay to have those reactions. We're only human beings. And as a matter of fact, it would be problematic if you didn't, because the Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, which is authentic, the one who does not concern herself or himself with the affairs of the believers should question their belief. The one who does not concern herself, like if you are not feeling overwhelmed by the pain and the atrocity of what's happening, then that's a reason to basically look into and inside you and basically ask, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my iman? And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Some people say, it must be difficult for you speaking to me because you have children now, and those children are, they have Gaza blood in them. These are, half or quarter Palestinian and people from Gaza. And now that it's blood, it's in your family, it must hurt a lot more than it did before. And I'm taken back by that statement because there's an assumption that blood is more important than the connection of La ilaha illallah, and that's not true. So the people of Gaza don't matter to us because their blood. They don't matter more to the Palestinians because their blood. They are our brothers and sisters, and they matter to us because of La ilaha illallah. And that's a bond that is thicker than blood. That's a bond that is thicker than blood, right? So we need to remember that. Because the Prophet said, how many of us remember when we're growing up in Islamic schools and we're growing up in Sunday schools and in khutbahs, we hear this all the time. None of you believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. Right? We hear that hadith about none of you is a true believer if you're able to go to sleep full and your neighbor is hungry. Well, what about what's happening on the ground? This is again, it's a reminder that we are in this together. That we're in this together. Amen. So having said that, I want to just step back and say there are two things that need to be mentioned. We're in a closed environment, right? We're in an echo chamber right now. And it's easy to become, very emotional and emotive and very aggressive or very, but I always encourage my brothers and my sisters, do not fall into the trap of double speak. Whatever you're not comfortable saying publicly, you should not be comfortable saying privately. There's no double speak. Our language is the same. Our message is the same, privately, publicly. There's no hypocrisy in Islam, right? You may choose to use words. Obviously, I'm going to use words here that maybe the public would not understand. I would provide more context. Maybe I would mention things, right, that are easy to mention because of the familiarity and the same code and the logic that we have. But we have to have this very, very clear commitment to avoiding double speak and to avoiding hypocritical contradictions. That is not who we are. And so if anybody were to ask me to condemn Hamas outside, I'll be very, very critical because you're playing into the whole, the narrative of always being on the defensive, always having to basically kind of defend, always having to be the one that's brought in and you're already painted as a criminal, right? But in this setting, we have to be very clear. We have to be very clear that there are rules to engagement and there are rules to jihad. There are rules to jihad. The Prophet ﷺ made this very clear, and the Umar Pact has made this very clear. The Prophet ﷺ says, under no circumstances or specific engagements should you cut a tree down, should you, unless you have to build it, if it's absolutely necessary, right? But just for the sake of destruction, you cannot cut a tree down. You cannot kill an innocent civilian, even if that civilian could be at any other part in military agents. Let's say, that civilian is civilian now, but that civilian could grow to be like a part of the military tomorrow. That is not acceptable because it's the time during which the engagement and the encounter takes place. But let me just be very clear about this to begin, and then we're going to broaden out and zoom out a little bit. So we cannot kill innocent civilians. We cannot cut trees down. We cannot infringe upon the worshiping sites and the worshiping places. We cannot take down churches or synagogues or kill people within churches or synagogues that are praying or they're taking safety in those spaces. Right. Okay, having established that, great. Those are the rules of engagement. But that's only one part of the equation. If you take a step back, having said that and having explained that, a colonial state that is categorically considered by many, many human rights advocates and lawyers who've been studying the matter for years Muslim and people of other communities, considered to be an apartheid state that has been expanding its borders at the expense and at the blood and at the displacement and the dispossession of homes, of children, men, women, for years, that also needs to be condemned, and it's absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. What's happening to the people of Gaza is an absolute nightmare. And it's not just since, October 7th, it's before that. Like, for example, some of you know this, some of you may not know this. In Gaza, and imagine you have the sea, you have the ocean, you have the water, the vast water right in front of you, but you cannot fish without getting a fishing permit. And in order for you to get a fishing permit, you need to go through, the regime. You need to go through the regime, and that permit can take up to 10 years to come back. You cannot build something without getting a permit from the regime, and that permit would most likely never be given to you, even on your own homes. The sewage system in Gaza has been in that state for 30 years. You cannot dig down to fix the sewage system in Gaza, because that would be considered potentially, you're digging for tunnels to fund terrorists and whatnot. So everything is considered to be, you're working towards something. It's not acceptable. It's technically an issue. We'll get you stuck through. Yeah, you're fine. We have no problem. You're not associated, but you have to go through this system, and that's it. That's what an apartheid system, that's what an apartheid state does, right? Is it gives specific privileges to people at the expense of others. You see certain Jewish schools. And again, our problem is not with the Jewish community. I have many, many rabbi friends and people in the Jewish community are more supporters vocally for Palestine and the Palestinians than some are Muslim, brothers and sisters, so-called brothers and sisters, who basically given up on the case and have made it a case that is nationalistic and Arab-centric and geographical-centric more than it is a case about Muslims and about Islam, right? So some of those people, you'll hear the language, you'll hear the hatred, right? You hear the hatred that is coming out. We cannot live with any Arabs. The intention is to basically exterminate the Arabs, get rid of the Arabs, get rid of these peasants, get rid of these backward, primitive, the dehumanization, the language, it's there. Now, does it represent everybody living under the state? Maybe not. Maybe not. Are there people like that on the Muslim community side? Yes, there are. Very aggressive, very angry, very emotive. But those are the ones that are basically determining our narrative. They're the ones that are being painted, even though there's such a few groups, such a few minority. They're the ones that are being presented and painted as the representatives of Islam and Muslims and Arabs and whatever else. And in that process, there's dehumanization. Think about the misinformation, the amount of lies that have been told. The interview with the Christian, the Baptist church before the Baptist hospital before it was bombed. There were 3 warning phone calls that were given. 72 hours, 48 hours, and 24 hours before the bombing. And the warning was evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. Right. And the church, the Baptist church leaders have confirmed and have verified that. And subhanAllah, very, very conveniently, right? 24 hours later, that hospital is bombed, and it's blamed on, people inside. Everything is like, they're being used as human shields. There's one Hamas militant who is being treated, or there's a worry about, some militants in the basement being treated. So for that reason, the whole area has to go. And all of this misinformation, all of these lies, it's horrendous. It's horrendous, right? And it gets you to wonder, to think about, subhanAllah, the extent to which hypocrisy and lying have been accepted internationally is just outrageous. So there's clear evidence on the ground and facts on the ground that people are choosing to dismiss, and then pull under the rug and say, you know what, this line of thinking, this line of conversation is very problematic because it existentially produces a threat to the states, and therefore it could be categorized as a form of terror or as a form of anti-Semitism, one or the other. And so you're constantly having to either be silenced, and any form of criticality or conversation or criticism would either be painted as a form of anti-Semitism or be painted as a form of, threats to the existence of the state, which is internationally recognized, and therefore you could easily be labeled as a terrorist. And we've seen this happen even with chaplains. Sheikh Anwar, who was a colleague of mine, when he went in on his in a response to a post, he mentioned, well, there is no clear verification. There's no real evidence that babies were beheaded. He lost his position as a chaplain in Western Union. Right? And so this is the reality on the ground, and this is what we're all feeling. And then to add on to that, you have, subhanAllah, influencers who are coming out and saying, even though they're not Muslim and they're pro-Palestine or pro-Palestinian justice and cause, they're coming out today, just a few hours, I'm sure some of you have seen this, and they're saying that the companies that we have contracts with, the agents that we're working with, the sponsor that we had, or the contracts for specific brands that we've had, are telling us to take specific posts down or we're going to lose the contracts. And if we post pro-state, right, or pro-Israel messages, we'll receive those contracts back, and they'll actually be doubled. They'll be doubled. And then the amount of, subhanAllah, if you've been noticing that brand or that chain of messages, it's a lot. It's a lot, it's subhanAllah, to just wrap your head around. And so you look at all of this, and how do you process? How do you process? It's an information crisis that we're losing in some ways, right? It's an international crisis that we've been losing for years. It's pain that we've been experiencing, suffering one after the other, right? So we just attended. Mustafa was with me. We went to St. Catherine's for one of the fundraisers that we had for the people of Gaza, and one of the sisters there, Palestinian, she said, the only thing that I have left of my house when my grandparents were forced out of the house is the key. And she shows the key to her house, a large black key. Because this was the hope that one day would go back. And nobody talks about that dispossession. Very few people still talk about that dispossession. Very few people even remember the amnesia that we have in the Muslim community. And it's, you step back and you think, subhanAllah, about the amount of torture and the amount of violence that was done to dispossess the people of Palestine in 48, in later years, consistently, continuously. It's outrageous. And it's not just our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Very similar things are happening where, guys? Very similar things are happening to the Uyghurs under the regime in China. Very similar things are happening to our Kashmiri brothers and sisters. Our Bosnian brothers and sisters experience something very similar. Afghanistan experienced something very similar. Iraq experienced something very similar, right? And Sudan experienced something very similar. And all around the world, you have these micro examples of aggression, some forms of genocide that are taking place against Muslims, against people who say La ilaha illallah. And it seems that we are continuously forgetting that this is happening or that it happened, and then getting distracted by other things. So this is now the reality. And I'm again summarizing a lot. Some of you would be able to speak about specific elements of it better than I am, because it's closer to your situation and your feelings. But this is just to explain kind of the big picture. Now, stepping back, we're gonna kind of walk through this and process this, subhanAllah, slowly. Your first reaction when you see all of this is shock, pain, and I want to say it's okay to feel. Like my first point, it's okay to feel, to cry, to be in pain, to weep, to be enraged, to feel angry, to feel upset, to feel disappointed, to be hurt, to be broken, to be let down. It's okay to feel all those feelings. As a matter of fact, sometimes we forget that even the prophets and the messengers felt very similar feelings. Look at subhanAllah and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when he was approached by Anas ibn Malik, and he was told, Ya Rasulullah, your daughter just lost a son. What did Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam say? He says, لله ما أخذ وله ما أعطى وكل شيء عنده لأجل مسمى إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون اللهم أجرنا في مصيبتنا واخلفنا خيرا منها. We'll translate that in a second. Same thing happened when he lost his son Ibrahim. Ibrahim was just an infant, and he's holding him, and he's no longer, and he's lifeless. And what did he say? He says, إن العين لتدمع وإن القلب لا يحزن ولا نقول إلا ما يرضي ربنا وإنا لفراق يا إبراهيم لمحزونون. What does he say? He says, indeed the eye sheds tears, the heart feels sorrow, but I will not say except what pleases my Lord. Whatever His will has come to be, whatever He's determined has happened, and I'm indeed saddened by your departure, O Ibrahim. Now this is very interesting because the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us something very special about Muslims. Very special. He's teaching us that you cannot control what happens to you. You cannot control how you feel. But the first step is to control what you say and the narrative that you play in your head. Because your verbal expressions are going to be a manifestation of your thoughts. Your verbal expressions are going to be a manifestation of your thoughts. So the Prophet ﷺ is reminding us to begin the self-control process with your language. Because once you put a word out there, you give it power. You make it real into the world. So he's teaching us to begin the self-control process with that. I cannot control what happens to me when it happens to me, but I can control the story that I play in my head and the narrative that I fuel in my head by the words that I say and how I choose to express myself. And how did the Prophet ﷺ express himself when these things happened to him in his life? When he had a loss of a loved one or a really, really painful situation, he would say, for Allah what He's given and for Allah what He's taken. And everything with Him is in a predetermined manner. Meaning, yes, Allah has taken my son, but hey, Allah is the one who gave me that son to begin with. Allah has taken my daughter, but Allah is the one who's giving my daughter to begin with. Allah has taken my job, but Allah is the one who gave me that job to begin with. So that grounding principle. Now, be with me because, again, we're going to begin with that, and then we're going to talk about how that should not be the end. That's just the beginning. Because some people stop there. Some people use religion or use this deen as a coping mechanism. Okay, khalas, it's all meant to be, whatever, inshallah, when Allah wills, the Mahdi will come one day. There's not much to say, it's beyond. Right, that's very problematic and very dangerous. Very problematic and very dangerous. So the first step in the coping process is to kind of what? To take a step back, to acknowledge your emotions, to let them out, to talk about your emotions, but to do so in a way that is constructive and in a way that does not bring into question your iman or weaken your iman or weaken your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ibn al-Qayyim says, what a sad reality for someone who loses twice, loses a loved one or loses a big, big, big test, and then loses again by using that mourning or that pain to disconnect from Allah. He says, what a terrible loss. Shaitan beats you after the reality of the ground overwhelmed you. So you don't want to be in that reason where your pain or your mourning is used by Shaitan to get you into this like existential crisis. Oh my God, what's wrong with me? Or maybe Allah is not real. Maybe this is all nonsense. SubhanAllah, some people go into that dark path and they get dissociated from the community. And that we've seen that happen for people, SubhanAllah, who the trauma is just so much that it stunts the person and limits them. And that's why, SubhanAllah, when you look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in the Qur'an, you think about the time of the Ahzab, and this is amazing. The time of the Ahzab, when Medina got surrounded from every corner, and they were so overwhelmed and outnumbered, and they were going to be destroyed. They were going to be destroyed. In the people of Medina, within the people of Medina, there were camps. There were camps, right? There were camps that were hypocritical, but they were weak. So they tried to make excuses. Inna biyutana awra wa ma hiya ba'awra. They would come to the Prophet and say, Ya Rasulullah, I have some issues with my house. I really got to go take care of my family. So I would love to be with you on the forefront to really be here, with this battlefield, but I can't because I have issues. And so what they do is they're playing the double game. They're like, yeah, I am with the community, you see, but here's the thing. As long as I am not in the battlefield, I'm at home with my family, maybe when the Quraysh come and destroy all Medina, that I can come and be like, hey guys, I never had anything to do with them anyway, I just stayed in my house, I said nothing. So that neutrality, you're trying to play that game of just, okay, I want to just, it's a game of chances. It's not about truth, it's not about justice, it's about survival. So let me just figure out what can I say to appeal to the Muslims and at the same time to appeal to the global audience, so I'm not painted, I'm not labeled, I'm not judged. That I got my family to feed, my community to worry about. So they're playing the dancing game, the word game. And that's one. Then you have the people who were completely, oh, Medina's done, we're all done, khalas, go sign treaties now with the enemy. Just this is a matter of fate, it's gonna happen. And they betrayed the cause. And then you had others when they saw إذ جاءوكم من فوقكم ومن أسفل منكم وإذ زاغت الأبصار وبلغت القلوب الحناجر وتظنون بالله الظنون هنالك ابتلي المؤمنون وزلزلوا زلزالا شديدا. And then some of them ما وعدنا الله ورسوله إلا غرورا. And then others said هذا ما وعدنا الله ورسوله وما زادهم إلا إيمانا وتسليما. So some people, when they saw this, they're like, oh no, ما وعدنا الله ورسوله إلا غرورا. What the Prophet told us and what Allah told us is just all lies. Because it was such an overwhelming feeling. Allah says, they came from on top of you, from behind, and from every corner. Allah says that. The eyes became blurry. You don't know where to look. Oh my Lord, everywhere I look, there's something bad about to happen. Right? And then somewhat Iman, as soon as they said this, like, this is exactly what the Prophet and the Messenger told us is going to happen. So this increased their Iman, increased their tabat. Can you imagine the same reality is getting some to question their faith, to turn away, others to kind of be neutral, playing that game of chance. And yet others became even more firm in their commitment and became more firm in their Iman. This is what Allah and His Messenger have promised. And so, you look at the Qur'an, and what does the Qur'an say? What does the Prophet ﷺ say? He says that وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُهْتَدُونَ. Allah says, we will test you with fear, some hunger, some loss of crops, some loss of wealth, and some loss of life. Some loss of life, people that you love, people that you care about. And give glad news to those who are going to remain patient. Those, upon seeing and witnessing all of that, they say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. They say, we are all to Allah, and to Allah we belong. To Allah we're in a state of perpetual return. We're already beginning our journey to Allah. Allah says, those who have the attitude, alayhim salawatu min rabbihim. They will receive this calming connection that will give them persistence from the Lord. And rahmah, Allah will give them that mercy. Despite all the chaos, all the patience, Allah will give them that mercy. So Allah's teaching us what to say in those moments. The Prophet ﷺ taught us what to say in those moments. Right? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To Allah we belong, and to Allah we're going back. Lillahi ma akhadha, to Allah what He's taking. Wa lahu ma a'ta, and to Allah what He's given. Wa kulla shay'in 'indahu li ajlin musamman. Everything has a predetermined time. قدر الله شاء فعل. Whatever Allah has willed has come to be. Whatever has been mandated has indeed fallen. Right? All of these things that we now begin to say, and we repeat over and over again, and we use it to bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what did Allah also say? Allah says, وَلِيُمَحِّصَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَمْحَقَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Allah will allow certain times to really show who the believers are and who the people claim Iman but are not truly believers are. So moments like this will really show you where people stand. So Allah will send these tests that will constantly differentiate. Allah will, when things are nice, everything is great. What happens? We can all, pretend to get along, and everything is great, and we can all do these dancing games socially, but not really tell you how I feel. But difficult moments show you where everybody stands, because they've got to make a decision. They've got to make a statement. So it's difficult to play the dancing game. So Allah says He sends difficult moments like this to tell you, to show you, to even allow you to see yourself where your Iman is. So they become like a litmus test, right? Like, we subject we subject gold and material, and we want to test the truth of how real is this gold? Is it real? Is it fake? How real is this diamond? Is it real or is it fake? What do you subject it to? A lot of heat, intensity, right? And even the measuring, the units that we have, they're doing the same thing. They're penetrating through to see how much this entity can take. Is it really strong on the inside? Does it have core, or is it just shallow? So the same thing, Allah tests our Iman through moments like this. Now, specifically with Gaza, if you look at the number of hadith that talk about that region, the number of things that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us to think about when it comes to this, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, there will come a time in which it will seem like you're being attacked from every direction, from right, from left, from center, from everywhere around you, as if you are a prey that is being preyed upon. You're a weak animal that is being preyed upon from every direction. In another table, it's as if you're a piece of meal being devoured in a very, very savage manner. Many of these hadiths. So the Prophet ﷺ came back and he said, Ya Rasulullah, awa min qillah? Is it because we're going to be few? He said, no, you're going to be many. But you're going to be like ghutha is-sayl. You're going to be like the foam on the water. There's so many. But how, think about foam. Foam is not, look, foam seems to be connected, right? It seems to be large, it seems to be big, but it's actually weak, easy, just some air and it pops like a bubble. So he's telling us you're like bubbles. Bubbles, you can have them like coagulate and form, but the minute you begin to separate them, they pop, and you show it's really clear how weak they are. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling us there will come a time in which you're going to be large in number. We're not a minority, but we have no real substance, no real influence, no real effect. So then they said, Ya Rasulullah, how did we get to that place? How did we get to that level? He said, oh, you got to that level, of being, Maghrib came in, right? 5 minutes? Okay. So you'll get to that level when two things happen. And look at the simplicity of the Prophet Muhammad's words. He said, you're going to get to that level when you begin to love dunya and you begin to fear death. Now let me explain very, very quickly. You begin to love dunya. So we are chasing dunya. We love dunya. Things that we're no longer working for a cause or working towards something that is of valuable, something that is tangible, based on code, based on ethics. We're just loving dunya. So you see people talking to each other. Oh, which part of Oakville do you live in? Which part of Hamilton? Do you live in Lancaster or do you live in downtown? Oh, how big? Like it's in the subtle things, right? It's in the subtle things. You always want, like, well, what car do you drive? Oh, so we have all of these factors that we use to judge, to assess the value of people. And very few of us actually are not materialistic. Very few people can say that they're not materialistic. Many of us, Nabi said, you'll get to that level, we're clearly in that level, when you begin to love dunya. That's number one. You love dunya. So you value each other based on your possessions. Oh, you have a Tim Hortons cup in your hand. I don't drink Tim Hortons. I drink Starbucks. I don't drink Starbucks, right? For many reasons, right? But that's the idea. We begin to assess each. Oh, that's Gucci. MashaAllah, Gucci, right? Very posh, nice. Or the watch that you have, right? So you have so all of these markers, of wealth, markers of wealth. And think about the ways that we channel that. Oh, you're carrying a Mac. Oh, it's all of these ways that we assess each other based on the capitalistic society that we live in. Assigning value to each other is happening in a very subtle, implicit ways. But now compare that to, go back to the story of Jerusalem. When the Prophet Muhammad predicted that the Muslims would enter Jerusalem, and he told Solace, you are going to be among the people who enter, right? You're going to be there when the Sicilian Empire falls, and you're going to, subhanAllah. And when Umar ibn Khattab was asked himself, the bishops at the time said, we're not going to give the keys to Jerusalem except to the man himself, Umar. We've heard that he's a man of justice and we're going to give him the keys. Now, when Umar was brought, Umar, being the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the leaders at the time, he was very chill about it. He was like, okay, we're going to go receive the keys to Jerusalem. The army is in one narration behind him, another narration, ahead of it. He's just by himself with one of the other people, and he's actually way ahead. He's not intimidating the people. The stronger opinion is way ahead of the army. And he himself is actually holding the reins to the donkey, and the man that is accompanying him is on the donkey when the bishop meets him. And the bishop and the others that come with the bishop, they obviously have what? They went all out in terms of being flashy, being bling, yeah? So they had like a big carriage, and the carriage had like all kinds of gold, all kinds of drapes, all kinds of like really, really beautiful golden ornaments. And he himself had like, this nice decorative, like crown-like thing with, very decorative. They're coming dressed. It's a big deal. You want to show your worth, your value. So how do you show that worth, that value? You show their worth and value through your possessions, through what you wear, how you do it. That's the language of power. But Umar has a very different language of power. He comes with clothes that he's been wearing for a long time. There are some, stains. You can imagine he's been traveling for some time, and there's some even ruptures. And at that time, the man looks at the go, "Where's Umar? Umar?" And he's like, "Oh, this is going to be this is going to be a problem." And it's going to be a problem, right? But Umar says his famous line, "نحن قوم أعزنا الله بالإسلام." We are a group of people that Allah has given honor and dignity through this Islam. And the minute we begin to pursue honor and dignity through other than Islam, we're going to be humiliated. So Umar is reminding us, our Islam, our istislam, our connection, our submission to Allah is the source of our honor. It begins there. So Islam has to be the prism through which we think about how to process this pain, how to not be stunted by the pain, and how to move forward. And the Nabi made that very clear to us, and Umar Khattab made that very clear to us. Now, the second part of the hadith, Nabi said, you're going to get to that level when you begin to love dunya and you begin to fear death. What does it mean to fear death? Does it mean to be like a warmonger? You want to go in and chop it? No. And Nabi actually said, "La tatamannaw liqa al-adu." Do not wish to meet your enemy. Do not wish to meet your enemy. But if you happen to, then you have to be firm and ready. Right? In many places. You have to have enough deterrence so that you don't have to go to war. You have to have enough deterrence and strength that you're able to have that card to prevent you from going to war. But when the Nabi mentions that you begin to love dunya and you fear death, you begin to not think about actively the day that you meet Allah. And what happens when we begin to not think about the day that we meet Allah? We're not living every day like it could be our last day in this world. It's a very different attitude. If I tell you today is your last day, you are going to act very differently. You're going to call some people, you're going to apologize, and give some debts back. "Oh, sister, this pen, it's yours. Please take it back." All right, I've owed you $20 for like the longest time. For some of you, it's not $20, $20,000, right? So you are going to begin to give amanat back. You're going to apologize. You're going to call some people. "I'm so sorry, Mom, I haven't been there for you. Dad, I haven't been there. I've been so distracted." It's a very different attitude. Things shift. Priorities shift. Actions shift. Commitments shift. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, you begin, or things, Allah will take the haybah. The hadith is actually, Allah will take that honor. People will not look at you as an honorable group. That honor, that dignity, that respect is going to be taken away. And your ability to, some people have this aura that almost intimidates, not aggressively, but out of awe. So the Muslims that are at the time of the Prophet and the companions, they had this aura to them. Like these are people that have very, very, very true, genuine, an honor code. They are true to their word. They represent something that is beautiful. So there was this honor, aura associated with the people of Islam. Allah's Prophet is telling us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is going to be taken away from you when you do these two things. You begin to love dunya, and you begin to not look forward to the day that you meet Allah. You begin to kind of defer, not to think about it, not have it as an active action or an active part of your psyche and your mind. Right? With that, inshallah, we'll take Maghrib. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions فما وهنوا لما أصابهم في سبيل الله وما ضعفوا وما استكانوا. Allah is telling us when we go through moments like this, difficult moments, is that we should be careful not to fall into three potential holes that can really limit us. So Allah says, فَمَا وَهَنُوا, they did not feel wahan. Wahan is the sense, imagine, you feel stuck, you feel disabled. The sadness is so powerful that it makes you, again, unable to move. You're stuck. وَمَا ضَعِفُوا, ضَعِفُوا means they got weak. So we should not let these feelings get us to feel stuck. We should not feel weak. وَمَا اسْتَكَانُوا, اسْتَكَانُوا, giving in to the reality. So we should not say, okay, fine, I guess this is the new norm. I guess the world, that's just how it is. We should not say that. That's how it is. We should not feel weakened. We should not feel defeated. We should not feel stuck, overwhelmed to a point where we cannot move. So sadness is good to a point, but once it begins to limit you and cripple you, it's no longer productive. And that's when you need to disconnect, take a few steps back, reassess, and find a productive way out. Now, when you look at the hadith of the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the Nabi says, مَا مِن دَاءٍ إِلَّا وَجَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَهُ دَوَاءً. There's no problem, there's no disease, there's no ailment, except that Allah has created for it a cure, a way out. عَلِمَهُ مَنْ عَلِمَهُ وَجَهِلَهُ مَنْ جَهِلَهُ. Those who know it, and those who don't know it, won't know it, right? Won't know it. So, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is reminding us, and Ibn Qayyim comments on this, he says, this applies for every ailment, whether it's social, political, psychological, medicinal, whatever it may be, there's always a way out. There's always a way forward. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us not to get into this panic attitude. مَنْ قَالَ هَلَكَ الْقَوْمُ فَأَهْلَكَهُمْ أَهْلَكَهُم. The one who says we're destroyed is the most destroyed out of them, is the source of destruction. So we should avoid this negative, pessimistic attitude. Always be optimistic, always be constructive, always find a way to channel your emotions towards a productive, constructive outcome, and to have very clear mandates that you're working towards. Right? So there's a beautiful book written by Ibn Qayyim, The Disease and the Cure, and I'm teaching it at UTM. And one of the things that we're looking at, subhanAllah, is the story itself, the introduction of the book. Ibn Qayyim is sitting there, a man comes and says, I feel overwhelmed. There's something that I'm struggling with. I keep struggling with it over and over again. And it seems like the more I focus on it, the more power I give it over me. So what can I do? And Ibn Qayyim writes this beautiful book on how to basically go through life's difficulty when things feel very overwhelming. And one of the very first things that he mentions, he says, look, your dua, your prayer is important. But at the beginning of the introduction and the first few pages, he mentions what the dua is and the nature of the dua to the believer. And he gives this beautiful attitude. I want you to know a beautiful image, beautiful metaphor. Because your dua is like the arrow, and your bow is what's used to launch the arrow. If your bow is weak, if it's flimsy, if it's floppy, don't expect the arrow to go long. Don't expect the arrow to go far. So your dua is coming out of your heart, coming out of your iman, coming out of this belief, this firm conviction that you have. If you have that conviction, then it'll go far. But if your conviction is not strong enough, your dua won't go anywhere. And he says, your dua, the first thing that you have as a Muslim is the power of dua. That's your first arsenal. That's your first tool available to you. But just like any medicine, your dua will only be as effective if it's put in the right place at the right time, and there's no competing reagent that's neutralizing it. Very powerful words. So he says your dua is effective as it is put in the right place. So if it's oral, don't take it topically and expect for things to work. It's not going to happen. So right place, right manner, and no competing reagents that neutralize it, that make it or render it useless. So what are those things that render our dua useless? And the Nabi says in the hadith, which is authentic, this man who's in the desert, lost everything, asking, Ya Allah, help me, over and over again. But his food is haram, his income is haram, his drinking is haram, his house is haram. So how is Allah going to accept this person's dua? So there's this notion that our dua, our prayers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are a really good place to start, but they're not going to be affected if we have competing reagents happening in our life. Dhulm, oppressing others. I'tida fi dua, using dua as an aggression, tool of aggression against somebody else. All of that is going to render the dua ineffective, useless, right? And then in addition to that, he mentions that there are certain things, Allah is not going to accept the dua of a heart that is distracted or not present. A dua that is not present, or a dua that is, or a heart that is not present, or a heart that is basically distracted. And then he says the hadith which is authentic, and this is where I want to basically come to. He says in the hadith which is authentic, and there's a bunch of them. He says in the hadith of Hulayfa, he says, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ لَتَأْمُرُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ أَوْ لَيُوشِكَنَّ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَبْعَثَ عَلَيْكُمْ عِقَابًا مِنْكُمْ ثُمَّ تَدْعُونَهُ فَلَا يُسْتَجَابُ لَكُمْ وفي رواية لتأمرن بالمعروف ولتنهون عن المنكر أو ليسلطن الله عليكم شراركم فليسومونكم سوء العذاب ثم يدعو خياركم فلا يستجاب لهم لتأمرن بالمعروف ولا تنهون عن المنكر أو ليبعثن الله عليكم من لا يرحم صغيركم ولا يوقر كبيركم. All of these ahadith, they reiterate the same meaning. Let's look at them one by one. The hadith of Hudayfa, he says, the Prophet told us, you shall continue to encourage the good and stand up for justice and prevent evil, or Allah will send a punishment in the most unexpected of ways. And you will continue to make dua over and over and over again, but it will not be accepted. Your dua will not be accepted. فَلَا يُسْتَجَابُ لَكُمْ. And then the other hadith, you will continue to, I swear by the one whose soul my hand, or who basically has control over my soul, who my soul is in his hands, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I swear, as real as he is, you shall continue to encourage the good and prevent the evil, or Allah will empower the worst amongst you to be in charge of your destiny, and they will يَسُومُونَكُمْ سُوءَ الْعَذَابِ. They will mistreat you in the most painful of ways. They will allow you to experience the most difficult of torture, punishment. ثُمَّ يَدْعُ خِيَارُكُمْ. And then the best of you will be making dua amongst you, but they will not be able to have that dua answered. So there's the reason I began with Surah Al-Anfal, there's an ayah in Surah Al-Anfal. What's the ayah? وَاتَّقُوا فِتْنَةً لَا تُصِيبَنَّ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنكُمْ خَاصَّةً. Be careful, because the fitna will come that will not just affect the worst amongst you, it will not punish the worst amongst you, it will affect everybody. The companions, they say that we heard the Prophet ﷺ comment on this ayah and say that Allah will not punish the many, collective punishment. Allah will not allow the many to be punished, right? When only some are doing bad, Allah will not allow it to affect everybody, except when that community persistently continues to experience injustice and people refuse to stand up, refuse to advocate, refuse to encourage the good and prevent the evil. So when we say that the Prophet ﷺ already gave us, again, so much guidance when it comes to all of this, so much prediction when it comes to all of this, he says that the people amongst you that will be fighting the most and resisting the most and persisting the most and the highest of Iman will be in the people of Bayt al-Maqdis and around Bayt al-Maqdis, the people of Jerusalem and the people around the people of Jerusalem. There's another hadith in which he mentions the people of Asqalan. Where's Asqalan? Gaza. He literally told us there will come a time in which these people will be holding on to Iman, holding it on for the rest of you, and they will be the highest in Iman amongst you. And they will not be disappointed by those that let them down or those that betray them. They will continue to believe, and their faith will not be in any shape or form. They will not be demoralized. Their faith will not be stunted or inhibited or limited because of the disappointment of others. They will continue to give back, and they will not refuse to buckle down. But subhanAllah, I wanted to, just bring our attention to that we can come to a point where our dua is not accepted. You're making dua day in, day out, but it's not accepted because it's being rendered no by injustice that's happening in our life, by lack of advocacy, by lack of control, by lack of taking, destiny into our own hands, self-determination into our own hand, by lack of centralization, by lack of mobilization, by lack of advocacy. Because Allah makes it so clear in the Qur'an, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah will not change the condition of the people until they change their own condition. So don't sit back and think, oh, Iman is just my coping mechanism. I'm going to pray, and then inshallah I've done my part. Khalas, I'm going to make a little bit of donation, and that's it. I've done my part. There's nothing else to be done. Dua and charity. Yeah, but dua and charity, that's the beginning. Allah mentions in the Qur'an, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Your Iman has to always be coupled with what? With action. Your Iman has to always be coupled with action. Iman is the beginning. You go to the masjid, you recharge your battery. Oh, now I feel, nice. Okay, now what do you do with that niceness? So, you see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the sweetness of Iman, not so that it becomes the ends, but it becomes the means. So when you have clarity, what can I do now when I have that clarity? You have that strength, you have that Iman, you have that sakina, that tranquility, that peace, you have that recharge through the salah, through the prayer, through all of these things. Now the journey starts. Now the journey of advocacy starts. Now the journey of speaking out starts. Hadith of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the best kind of jihad, أفضل الجهاد كلمة عدل عند سلطان جائر. The best kind of jihad is a word of justice in front of an unjust leader. An unjust leader, that's a form of jihad. And the Nabi says, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyir." You know, that whoever sees amongst you an evil shall try to change it with, right? Change it with what? With their hand. If they cannot, with their tongue. If they cannot, with their hearts. Right? If they cannot, then they should at least remove themselves from the situation, so they're not part of the problem. So with our hands, what can we do with our hands? So much, right? Advocacy, being present, being involved in writing emails, sending messages, defending those who are being persecuted, those who are being silenced or being canceled because of advocacy or because of speaking out, amplifying the voices. And this is a fight that we should not be losing. The fight of misinformation, the fight of being dehumanized should not be lost. And we need to, all of us, recalibrate and think, okay, we've been making dua for 75 years for the people of Palestine, but it's definitely not being accepted. What did the Prophet say? Your dua is not going to be accepted when you stop forbidding the evil and encouraging the good. It's not going to be accepted. Your iman means nothing. Why would he give it to you? Why would he give you what you're hoping for if you're not standing up for truth? Why would he give it to you? Why would he answer your dua? You've refused to answer the call to Allah. Allah says unite, stay together, stay connected, work together. Don't let one of you fail. Don't let one of you break it. That's what Allah says. And if Allah has given you the resources, then you don't turn to Allah and say, help us. Allah's given you everything you need to be helped. We don't lack money, man. We're one of the richest populations in the world. We don't lack money. Some of you guys, they have more money than anybody can imagine. I know who you are. And you know who you are. And some of you must say, one day. Right? But we're not a poor community. We're not low in numbers either. We're talking about 1.9, 1.8 billion people in the world. So we're not low when it comes to money. We're not weak when it comes to numbers. We're not weak when it comes to resources either. We're not weak when it comes to resources. You think about Muslims and the amount of resources that we've had. When Arab countries came together to do the oil boycott, they caused a big damage and caused the world to slow down and to rethink. So we have the capacity, we have resources, we have knowledge, we have education. We're not an uneducated group. Think about the number of lawyers, doctors, engineers, mashallah, tabarakallah, many specialists in the Muslim community, right? Especially in the diasporic context. You look at North America, you look at the US, you look at Canada, you look at Europe, maybe more so Canada than the US, but you have a lot of Muslims who have capacity of education, of knowledge. That was not the case maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? But only when we begin, let me be very clear, when we begin to centralize, unite, support one another within the legal avenues and the means possible, will the Muslims be taken seriously. So the Iman, that gives us resilience, discipline, clarity. Faith gives us the battery, the energy. The knowledge of the Qur'an, studying gives us clarity, because you have a lot of these Muslims who end up being in all kinds of areas, but they become tokens. They become the companies that say, oh, we have a Muslim, they're here. They're there. But are they there as Muslims? Very few people are. Because they lack the education, or they lack the willpower or the confidence. That's where Iman comes in. Iman gives you the education. You learn, you read the Qur'an, you study your history, you educate yourself, you experience that Iman that gives you the confidence to be comfortable in your skin. And that's when the journey begins, the education begins, right? The alliances that we've formed over the last couple of years. And that's why Muslims cannot afford to be lazy, guys. We cannot afford to be lazy. We cannot afford to be just mediocre, especially if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you the capacity to be articulate, the capacity to have a university education, the capacity to speak, the capacity to argue, to frame a point of view, to frame a narrative, to have the conversation. You cannot afford just to be in a state of mediocrity. You cannot. So we all need to step back and say to ourselves, okay, this is what the Prophet Muhammad is telling us, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised. We need to be united. We need to be together. We need to remain centered, focused on what matters. And we need to have purpose that we're working towards individually, collectively, as a group, as a community, to make sure that we have, again, the avenues in place and the networks in place to protect the interests of the Muslim community today, locally, internationally, globally. And we can. We can, because you go back to the hadith of the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there's no ailment or disease or problem in the social, political, economic, body-wise, health-wise, spiritual, except that Allah has placed the cure for it. عَلِمَهُ مَنْ عَلِمَهُ, the one who works towards it will find it. وَجَهِلَهُ مَنْ جَهِلَهُ, and the one who just chooses to ignore and not my problem will be ignorant of it. Will be ignorant of it. And sometimes, again, I need to read this again. فَعَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَخَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَى أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَشَرٌّ لَكُمْ. Perhaps you may dislike something that is good for you. Perhaps you may like something that is bad for you. This hurts. This is painful. But in the moments of pain, sometimes the greatest accomplishments are made. And the greatest heroes are born. And the greatest purposes and goals and visions are created and soon, inshallah, actualized. Soon actualized. And that's what we need to be focused on. Optimistic. Being really, really determined. Right? You have, for example, some of the good that came out of this. The emails that we're getting at ISNA, at other masajid, people that are interested in reading the Qur'an, people that are interested in learning more about Islam. People saying, I'm watching these Palestinians and it's driving me crazy how much faith they have, how much resistance, tenacity, resilience they have. How is it? Where do they get the energy? How do you bury 3 of your children and then stay grounded, stay centered, and stay focused? She's seeing, I see this nurse, she buried all of her children, she continues to work. She's like, I can't stop. She prays janazah, and the next thing that she's doing, she's comforting other people. This man who's lost 70 members of his family, like, I gotta continue reporting because the journalists, I gotta continue reporting because people need to know. I have a duty towards my community, towards my ummah. The reading clubs that now have started reading Qur'an, the amount of people that are reaching out, having conversations, and just the image. Yes, there's a lot of dehumanization that's happened, but wallahi, there was a lot of humanization that took place. And there are a lot of people that are taking interest in Islam, in Muslims, in the struggle of Islam and Muslims, in specifically the Palestinian issue, because of the conversation that is generating online. And people are beginning to see hypocrisy for what it is. People are beginning to see lies for what they are. So this is not a time to buckle, to back down, to feel humiliated or defeated, or to feel, in any shape or form, weakened or limited. This is a time in which you should be thinking, subhanAllah, in the most difficult of moments, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows birth to happen in the best of ways. So inshallah, the think tanks that will be contributing to resolutions are being created now. The networks nationally, transnationally, internationally, globally are being created now. I've been in the Muslim community in some capacity or the other, even as my father was an imam who was traveling from one country to country. I've never seen more unity, more centrality, more focus, more commitment from every generation, up and down, young and old. I've never seen it more in the Muslim community than today. And that's a good thing to think about and to acknowledge. Now the question is, what are we going to do with it? And specifically as MSA members and as Muslims on campus, what can you do productively, constructively, right? Channel the sadness and pain towards something that keeps you moving, not keeps you muted and silenced and disabled. No, allow it to empower you and to enable you to do good, right? And that's why you need to, inshallah, practically, I'm sure you're already in touch with the National Canadian Council of Muslims. You're in touch with the lawyers, the campaigns that are taking place. I encourage you to continue to do so. The statement that was released, may Allah bless you for that. The conversations that are taking place with the campus leads and the president's office, amazing. That's just the beginning. More of that needs to be done. Economically, subhanAllah, how many times we say, Allah, it saddened me. One of the people that I work closely with a Muslim brother, sister, they're like, oh, what happened today for sure, Khalas, I'm never going to buy this drink and I'm never going to support this company. I've made my decision and made up my mind. Well, 2 days later, I saw the brand in their hand. I gave them benefit of the doubt. Maybe they got it as a drink or as a gift, and they're like, I don't want that thing to go to waste. But that is an example, a micro example of how quick we forget. Oh, the amnesia that we have in the Muslim community. We're so reactive. You want emotive reaction? MashaAllah, tabarakallah. You want loud noises when we're in echo chambers? MashaAllah, tabarakallah. The minute you walk out of the campus, khalas, everything's good. So no more double speech. No, we cannot afford that anymore. No more weakness outside. We need to be committed. We need to know our plight. We need to know the history, education, and we need to carry this on our shoulders. And when it's said never again, this should be really, 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 inshallah, as a community, the model that we have from now on, never again. Never should we get to this point of humiliation and weakness and division and struggle and lack of representation and just dismissive lack of focus. This should be the last time that we as a community have to have this conversation. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be on the right side of history by speaking out against evil, by speaking out against genocide, by speaking out against atrocities, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be from those who will bring communities together, bring people together, bring individuals together, and build bridges of peace, Ya Rab, and bridges of advocacy on behalf of the Ummah and on behalf of the communities and on behalf of brothers and sisters that are struggling everywhere, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma hamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. And with this, we'll dedicate the last half an hour, inshallah, to Q&A and to conversations and to thoughts that you may have, inshallah.